Everyone loves detective stories, but no one would like to face a criminal plot in real life. The balance between truth and author's freedom was found by Yevgeny Edlin, the author of the crime podcast The Gold Bug, which tells about the true crimes that shocked humanity. The result of the author's interest in true detective stories was the book Real Monsters: The Path to Murder and Its Consequences. Lented R.U., with the permission of the Balmora Publishing House, publishes a fragment of the text that is dedicated to the search for one of the most brutal gangs in American history, the Chicago Rippers. A whole group of maniacs committed their monstrous crimes with impunity for several years in the early 1980s. Their victims were prostitutes, waitresses, and women who happened to be caught on their way. The deed was so terrible that disgust overwhelmed even experienced investigators, who still managed to stop all the gang members. Chicago Rippers. Humboldt Park is a quiet and beautiful place. It occupies 84 hectares in the northwestern part of the county seat of Illinois, the city of Chicago. In 1887, among the flat and dull prairies, a real green oasis appeared here with 2 lagoons, walking paths and other entertainment for citizens. On October 6, 1982, people walking along the railway tracks in the park noticed an unusual object on the rails from afar. They did not immediately guess that it was a human body. The object did not move and looked more like a dirty mannequin that someone carelessly threw away, either to scare passers-by on purpose, or simply because it didn't matter where to leave it. And suddenly the dummy moved. Then it began to seem as if the naked chest, for some reason alone, was barely noticeably raised. Shocked passers-by immediately called the police and an ambulance. Chicago Nightmare. One short glance at the woman was enough for the detectives to understand that it was them. Maniacs who have been terrorizing Chicago for the 2nd year. Big Red Van. It was a normal day at work for a prostitute named Beverly Washington. She was only 20, but she already knew how difficult it was to survive in the winter if she didn't save up at least some cash. The beginning of October did not work out. There were few customers, and even they turned out to be somewhat stingy. She was not frightened when a large red 1975 Dodge van with tinted windows drove up to her. Her clients were almost always secretive. The driver was tall, with pale skin and greasy brown hair. He wore a simple flannel shirt and square-toed boots. His mustache added to his age, but he still looked no more than 25. He was nervous and looked like a typical student who had difficulty communicating with girls and therefore turned to a professional. In general, he was not a very suspicious client, and besides, he offered more money than she was usually given. Beverly agreed, and they moved to his van. The girl did not have time to notice how the stranger's hand slipped somewhere to the side and a pistol was in it. The man pointed the weapon at her. Beverly's heart sank, and she realized that she had nowhere to run. The man ordered her to undress, fastened handcuff bracelets on her wrists, and then demanded oral sex. Beverly complied. She was scared, but so far it was already part of her job, not counting handcuffing. The girl experienced real horror when she was ordered to drink a handful of unknown pills. The last thing she remembered before waking up crippled on the train tracks was a wooden partition between the cab and the body, a rope in the man's hands, and jewelry on the rear-view mirror, a feather and a plastic cockroach on a clip. Beverly did not remember how she got to the hospital, but as soon as she came to, she told the police about everything she saw. Firm. The search for a suitable car, according to Beverly's description, took several weeks. On October 20th, a patrol stopped another red van on the road. The police cautiously approached the cabin and looked inside. A young guy with no facial hair and red curly hair was behind the wheel. It was definitely not the person Beverly had seen, but the car coincided to the smallest detail. The police asked the driver to come out for a conversation, and he complied. As a result of the interrogation, it turned out that the driver, 21-year-old Edward Spreezer, worked in a construction contract for a certain Robin Hecht, and the van belonged to him. Then the police demanded to take them to Hecht's house. As soon as Hecht came out, it immediately became clear that it was him who was seen by the victim. Even the clothes were as she described. The officers immediately approached him to ask a few questions. He was not only not embarrassed, but even expressed his readiness to actively help the investigation. However, there was nothing to show him yet, so the police secured his promise to stay in the city and left. When detectives received information about the arrest of a van that matched the description and the identification of its owner, they decided to show Beverly a photo of Hecht, among others. And she pointed to him at once. On November 3rd, detectives received an arrest warrant and went to the suspect's house. He was already waiting for them, and not alone but with a lawyer. After arresting Spreezer and Hecht, the police continued to investigate the attacks on women. They returned to Angel York and found that she had been tortured in the same red van. In addition, the police were able to find another similar kidnapping, but there was no direct evidence. Detectives began to interview everyone who could know at least something about the suspects. This was especially true of Hecht. However, it turned out that there is practically no information about the life of the suspect, and it is very difficult to find it. He was born on November 30, 1953, in Menard County, Illinois, and apparently led an unremarkable life. But several extremely alarming details became known. Firstly, it turned out that Hecht clearly has some kind of obsession with women's breasts. As a child, he did not give his sister a pass, for which he was sent to live with his grandparents. Those women he once dated reported that he asked for permission to pin their breasts or cauterize them. And his wife, according to the testimony of her acquaintances, allowed him to injure herself, including leaving serious rotting wounds and cutting nipples. However, Hecht's wife herself did not admit it. In 1981, his son David was born. The second sinister detail that came to light as a result of the analysis of Hecht's life is the fact that he worked in the late 70s as a subcontractor for a notorious maniac, John Wayne Gacy. They could not find any traumatic episodes or problems in Hecht's family. Given the scant evidence and the fact that the suspects stubbornly denied his guilt, the only thing left to hope for was the young Spreezer. After a while, the guilt and fatigue of the daily interrogations seemed to overpower the feeling of fear of the boss, and he burst into a long 78-page confession. For Spreezer, it all started from the day Hecht hired him. Once they got into a shootout, as a result of which one person died, and the other was left disabled. The police were still investigating the matter at the time, and the information received from Spreezer came as a surprise. However, something much more shocking awaited them further. Spreezer claimed that he was involved in the murders against his will, and that he participated in them only out of fear of Hecht. They picked up a black woman, blindfolded her and gagged her. Robin shot her point-blank in the head. He put chains around her neck and legs, attached 2 bowling balls and threw her into the water. As far as I understand, her body has not been found, Spreezer wrote. According to him, they committed this murder even before their first victim was found. That day, Hecht ordered him to stop near a black prostitute. He went out and, after agreeing on the price, had sex with her in the van. Then they got out and walked together to the nearest alley. There he attacked her and cut off her left breast with a knife. He then dragged the woman back to the van, where he shot her. Even experienced detectives who dealt with all kinds of perverts could not hold back their emotions. Disgust overwhelmed them every time Spreezer reported more and more horrifying details. Spreezer spoke about at least 8 attacks, 7 murders and 1 beating. and it seemed that he was ready to continue, when suddenly he abruptly changed his testimony. This happened right during the interrogation. Investigators who witnessed the event said that after several victims were identified, they decided to put pressure on Hecht and brought him photographs. He did not react to them in any way and continued to calmly talk about his complete innocence and ignorance of the Spreezer cases. Then the police decided to take a different path. They took Hecht to the observation room, where he could see his accomplice telling the detective something. However, Hecht continued to pretend that he did not understand what was being said. But Spreezer seemed to feel that the big boss was watching him, and began to talk such nonsense that the interrogation had to be stopped. Spreezer began to divert suspicion from Hecht in every possible way and suddenly gave a new name. It was another employee of their construction firm, Andrew Kokoralius, whom Spreezer knew through his girlfriend, his sister. Hecht confirmed that this person worked for him, and even gave his address. The investigators immediately took up Kokoralius. At first they just called him, and he answered questions extremely suspiciously. Then it turned out that Andrew and his brother Thomas used psychoactive substances and were often not themselves. The police decided to take the suspect to the police station and interrogate him using a polygraph. Kokoralius, of course, did not pass it. Then, as a result of a long interrogation, Andrew told about his brother, the fourth member of the gang. Meanwhile, the results of the investigation into the murder of Linda Sutton have arrived. The manager of the Rip Van Winkle Hotel recognized Hecht and the Kokoralius brothers. They rented connecting rooms. In addition, the brothers left their home address for mail forwarding. While Hecht pretended not to know what his employees were doing, they added more and more victims to the general list. Andrew described in detail how the gang kidnapped the girls and then either brought them to a motel or Hecht's home, or they stayed right in the van. They talked and did not notice how they confessed not only to well-known crimes, but also to those of which the police had no idea yet. They described more than 18 murders. Members of the gang had great difficulty in calling Hecht's name. They all considered him their leader and were very afraid of him. The people who had committed such horrible crimes were trembling with fear of someone who, he said, had never laid a finger on a woman. The police could not find any direct evidence of his involvement, and could not understand what motive the four men had to commit such heinous and sophisticated murders. But soon Tomas Kokoralius gave an answer to this question. Their company was not a simple construction company. The media called them Chicago Rippers.